pull out the wrongful conviction files. Episode 11, The Missing Pieces. Welcome back. This is your host, Detective Roger Warstone. Imagine you spend months, no years, living inside a ghost story. You breathe the dust of the 20-year-old lab notes. You started at autopsy photos until they haunt your sleep. You memorize the mechanical manuals of firearms until you can't recite the specs in the dark. As an investigator, you learn that files aren't just paper, they are the compressed remains of human life. Then one afternoon, you find it, the smoking gun. But it's not a gun at all, it's a number, a simple 3-digit number written in a margin on a yellow piece of paper from the firearms identification unit. 101. In that moment, everything shifts. The room gets quiet. You realize that the bullet pulled from the victim's body physically cannot fit the gun they put in the client's hand. You realize that the laws of physics were suspended for a single afternoon in a Philadelphia courtroom 2 decades ago, just to secure a conviction. You take this to the legal team. You're high on adrenaline, off the truth. You're thinking, this is it. This is the key to the gate. You wait for the legal brief to be filled with superior court, and when it arrives, you open it with shaking hands, and that number isn't there. The science isn't there. The mechanics aren't there. The lawyers focus on the safe legal arguments and the procedural due diligence hurdles left out of the heart of the fraud. Welcome to episode 11. I'm Detective Roger Warstone. Today, we are going behind the curtain of a legal system that values finality over truth. I'm going to tell you why I was more than just frustrated, I was incensed. I'm going to break down why the Superior Court's January 6th ruling was a failure of justice. And I'm going to show you the Hail Mary play we are making right now to bring the client home. This segment is the anatomy of a reversal, the diligence trap. Let's talk about the ruling that brought us here. On January 6, 2026, a panel of the Superior Court looked at the client's case and slammed the door. They didn't say he was innocent, and they didn't say exactly he was guilty. Instead, they hid behind a procedural wall called due diligence. The court argued that the client waited too long to find witness number two, the victim who finally told the truth about being beaten and coerced. The court asked, why didn't you find him 10 years ago? Let's break down the hypocrisy of that question. They're asking a man sitting in a 6 by 9 cell with no resources, no internet, and no private investigator at the time to reach out to a crime victim, the very man he was convicted of shooting, and ask for help. Think about the insanity of that. If the client had tried to contact witness 2 years ago, the district attorney would have called it witness intimidation or harassment. They would have used it as an excuse to pile on more charges. The court's ruling implies that reasonable diligence means the client should have been pestering victims and witnesses from behind bars for decades. But reasonable is supposed to be fact specific. It's supposed to take into account the wall of fear that the Philadelphia Homicide Unit built. The court was flying blind. They made a decision based on a record that was missing the most vital organs of the truth. They saw a strong case because the prosecution's narrative was the only one allowed on the scale. But as an investigator, I know that strong cases are often just well rehearsed lies. If the court has seen the 101 grain discrepancy, if they had seen the mechanical impossibility of the weapon, will they still be talking about diligence? Or will they be talking about a miscarriage of justice? This segment is Pillar 1, Holistic Fraud and the 101 grain narrative. The foundation of the case against the client was a confession. But we know how those confessions were manufactured in the era of detectives. I don't want to say their names, one and two. They were investigations, they were scripts. To make that script stick, the prosecution needed the physical evidence to match the fiction. The jury was told the victim was killed with a 40 caliber weapon. This wasn't presented as a possibility. It was presented as a forensic absolute by a man with a badge and an expert title. But I went back to the source. I looked at the raw, unfiltered data from the firearms identification unit. I looked at the actual bench notes, the handwritten records of the technician who actually put the lead on a scale. The weight, 101 grains. Let's educate ourselves for a moment. Ballistics is a science of weight and measures. A 40 caliber weapon or bullet, is a heavy, substantial round. It is designed for stopping power. It typically weighs between 135 to 180 grains. There's no such thing as a 101 grain 40 caliber bullet. It doesn't exist. In the catalog of any major ammunition manufacturer, 101 grain is the signature of a 9 millimeter or perhaps 38 caliber. But the prosecution's expert witness stood on the stand, looked at the jury in the eye, and swore it was a 40 caliber. Why? Because the confession, the detectives forced the client to sign mention a 40 caliber gun. If the experts told the truth that the bullet was a 9 millimeter, the confession would have been revealed as a lie. The expert wasn't there to provide science. He was there to fulfill a narrative. He was there to make sure the lead fit the story, even if it didn't fit the laws of physics. It was a cover up masquerading as expert testimony. The trial lawyer at the time didn't contest it because the lawyer didn't have the lab notes. He relied on the expert to be honest, but in this case, honestly, was a casualty of the narrative. This segment is pillar two, the mechanical paradox. If the bullet grain wasn't enough to shake your faith in the system, let's look at the second pillar of this house of cards, the mechanical impossibility. The prosecution introduced a specific handgun, a 40 caliber, as the murder weapon now. Here is where the prosecution's own evidence eats itself alive. The weapons expert testified that the gun has a slide disconnect safety. This is a mechanical feature common in many semi automatic pistols. It is a safe measure. If the muzzle of the gun is pressed firmly against a surface, like a human back, the slide is pushed back just a fraction of an inch. That tiny movement disconnects the trigger from the firing pin. The gun physically cannot fire. It is mechanically impossible for the hammer to drop while the slide is out of battery. Now, take that fact and hold it in one hand. In the other hand, take the medical examiner's testimony. The ME testified that the victim died from a close contact wound. He described a hard contact shot where the muzzle was pressed too tight against the skin that no suit of stripling escaped into the air. It was all driven into the wound track. Did you see the contradiction? The expert says the gun won't fire on contact. The ME says the victim died from a contact shot. Both of these men were called by the same prosecution. They stood in the same courtroom. They gave the jury two pieces of fact that cannot both be true. The expert essentially contradicted himself. He gave the jury the specs that proved the gun couldn't do the job, but then he turned around and said, "This is the gun that did the job." He was talking out of both sides of his mouth. And the ME, he stepped out of his lane. He started playing criminalist, trying to explain how the shot might have happened inside the car, trying to bridge the gap between his autopsy and the prosecution's theory. He wasn't doing medicine, he was doing propaganda. Man, this is getting back to me. I'm sorry to you guys. You guys have to hear this over and over and over and over again. And I'm telling you, you guys probably already know everything better than the lawyers do. But I'm just going over the things they forgot to add so that the client could get out. But they didn't. They forgot. This segment is the pillar three, the buried timeline. While they were faking the science, they were also burying the timeline. The prosecution's star witness was a man named J.W. He was a co defendant facing life in prison. He was recruited, they said, to point the finger. J.W. claimed the client got the gun before the murder. He drew a map of the scene, but looked at the geography. J.W. put the shooter on the opposite side of the vehicle from where the driver, witness 3, said he was. J.W. eventually wrote a statement recanting his old statement, admitting his first story was false. He stated he lied to save himself, but he was too scared to officially testify to that in court. He got his deal. He got out of jail early for a crime that should have carried life. But the biggest piece of buried evidence was the wife of the guy that sold the weapon to the client. She was the owner of the guns. She gave a statement that was buried for 20 years. She said those guns were in her possession in her car until 2 days after the shooting. Think about the logic. If the guns were with this lady, they couldn't have been with the client. If the weapon was in her possession during the window of the murder, the entire prosecution timeline is a lie. This wasn't newly discovered evidence, it was buried evidence. The state had the truth in their files, but they buried it because it destroyed the JW narrative. They needed a killer and they had already picked their target. This segment is Pillar 4, the Witness 2 revelation. Then we have Witness 2. Witness 2 was a victim. He was shot in the abdomen during the same incident. He was taken to the hospital and then he was taken to the homicide unit. He told us decades later that he was beaten, that he was intimidated. He was forced to give a statement that fit the police narrative. If you look at the statement today, it's written in one hand. It doesn't read like the words of a victim. It reads like the report of a detective. Specifically, it looks like the work of a detective too. Victim 2 didn't speak up for 20 years because he was terrified. He felt safe only after the systemic misconduct of the Philadelphia Homicide Unit began to come to light in the news. When the Superior Court says the client should have found Witness 2 sooner, they are ignoring the wall of fear that these detectives built around the city. I provided the lawyers with the information. I gave them a presentation. I showed them that the Witness 2 was the missing piece that proved the House of Cards was built in coercion. This segment is the investigator's fight, a calling from God. When I realized the information submitted to the Superior Court was missing the forensic heart of the case, I didn't just get mad. I got to work. I went back to the lawyers. We had the hard conversation. I told them the wall of fear argument is a good legal bridge, but you have to show them the fraud. You have to show them the 101 grain bullet. I pushed the legal team to show the court that this wasn't just about one bad detective. It was about a coordinated attempt by the state to falsify a conviction. When you take a 9mm bullet and call it a 40 caliber, that is fraud. When you ignore the owner of the weapon to protect a lying co-defendant, that is fraud. I see these facts because I refuse to look away. People ask me why am I so passionate? Why I push this hard? I truly believe this is a calling from God. He gives me the enthusiasm to keep digging when the procedure says to stop. He allows me to see the truth that is hidden in plain sight. even when others are blinded by the narrative. I feel his push every time I open this file. The lawyers have finally submitted a response that hits back hard. They are telling the court, you can't blame a man in a cell for not finding a witness who was beaten into silence. But I'm making sure they don't stop there. We are showing the court that Detective Sue and the rest of the unit weren't looking for a killer. They were looking for a way to make the client fit a story they had already written. This segment is the closing, preparing for the return. I provided the lawyers with the science, the mechanics, and the proof of fraud. Now we wait on the system. The response they submitted should be more than enough for a judge to see through the procedural fog, allow the appeal to go through, and grant the client the one thing he's been denied for 20 years, a fair trial. But let me tell you something. If and when that new trial is granted, the client isn't just going back to court to plead for mercy. He's going back to take the fight to them. He's going back with the truth as his shield and the laws of physics as his sword. And as for me, my responsibility on this case doesn't end with a filing. It's only getting bigger. When we walk back into the courtroom, I will be the one standing over every grain of lead, every mechanical safety, and every scripted lie. We won't just be contesting their narrative. We will be dismantling it piece by piece. The truth doesn't mean anything if it stays in the room. Today, I'm asking you to be the light. Share the truth. Use the hashtag the 101 grain truth. Demand accountability. Ask why the laws of physics were ignored in a Philadelphia court. Stay focused. We are preparing for the day the gates open. I am Detective Roger Warstone. I won't stop digging. I won't stop pushing. And I won't stop speaking until the client walks free. Thank you for standing with me. The house of cards is shaking. We'll see you in the next episode when the gates finally open.